When most people hear the word inflation, their minds jump to rising prices, lost savings, and economic chaos. But what if I told you that inflation isn't always the villain it's made out to be? Hi everyone, this is George and welcome to my channel. Today we are diving into one of the most persistent misconceptions in economic discourse, the idea that inflation is inherently bad. The widespread belief overlooks the complex and nuanced relationship between price level changes and economic health. In reality, a moderate level of inflation isn't a sign of dysfunction, it actually indicates a thriving, adaptable economy. From economic theory to real-world evidence, we will explore how carefully managed inflation can improve efficiency, support sustainable growth, and even help economies adjust in times of change. While the trauma of hyperinflationary episodes has understandably shaped public perception, it's time we separate fear from fact. Now, let's break it down. The case for having a positive inflation rate is supported by several ideas in modern economic theory and literature. The Federal Reserve's and the ECB's goal of around 2% inflation each year is based on a large body of research showing that moderate inflation can help boost both spending and investment. At the same time, it helps avoid deflation, a situation where prices fall, which can slow down the economy by encouraging people to delay purchases and investments. This 2% target strikes a careful balance between the risks and benefits of inflation, recognizing that a small increase in prices each year is not only acceptable, but it is actually helpful for economic stability and growth. Recent academic studies have improved our understanding of the best inflation rate by using advanced economic models. One influential study used what's called New Keynesian models, which take into account how people and businesses respond to changing prices and wages, along with more complex real-world features, or the so-called nonlinearities. It found that the ideal inflation for both Japan and the United States is about 2% per year. However, the reasons behind this rate are different for each economy. In Japan, for example, the main reason is that interest rates are already very low, the zero-bound level as we call it. So inflation helps give policymakers more room to manage the economy. In the US, the key issue is the downward nominal wage rigidity, which means it's hard for wages to go down or even when needed, and inflation helps ease this problem by allowing real inflation-adjusted wages to fall without actually cutting paychecks. Economists have also identified several ways that moderate inflation can improve overall economic well-being. One such explanation is known as the Mandel-Tobin effect. This theory suggests that when inflation is slightly higher, people are less likely to hold on to cash that loses value over time. Instead, they are more likely to lend the money or actually invest it. This behavior leads to lower real interest rates, meaning the cost of borrowing money after adjusting for inflation, and can encourage more investments in things like machines, building, and technology. As a result, the economy can grow faster as long as it isn't already investing too much compared to what's sustainable over time, according to the long-term growth models. One of the strongest theoretical arguments in favor of moderate inflation comes from how the labor market works, especially reading how hard it is to lower wages. Economic research has shown that employers often find it very difficult to reduce nominal wages, that is, wages not adjusted for inflation. So even when the economy isn't performing poorly, and such reductions would make sense. This problem, known as the downward nominal wage rigidity, causes serious inefficiencies in the labor market. Instead of adjusting wages, companies are often forced to lay off workers during downturns. Moderate inflation offers an important way to help fix this issue. It allows real wages, so wages adjusted for inflation, to fall even if nominal wages stay the same. This is especially useful when productivity is flat or failing, as it helps wages adjust in a way that supports job retention. As a result, the labor market can return to balance more quickly. The European Central Bank has noted that this kind of wage rigidity is a strong reason to keep a positive level of inflation. It creates a grease the wheels effect that helps the euro area economy function more smoothly, especially by avoiding the need to adjust through higher unemployment when prices don't move enough. This idea has very important real-world consequences. When inflation is very high or even negative, countries often go through long periods of high unemployment because wages can't adjust easily. In contrast, economies with moderate inflation can adapt more effectively. Real wages can adjust without cutting nominal pay, which helps reduce both the length and the severity of economic slowdowns. The best inflation rate for a country depends on many factors, including its level of development, its institutions, and how its economy is structured. Developing countries, or as we call it, emerging market economies, often face specific challenges that justify aiming for slightly higher inflation targets than those used by more developed countries. A detailed study of 14 emerging economies that adopted inflation targeting policies show strong results. These countries managed to bring down higher inflation from double-digit levels to rates similar to those in advanced economies, while also achieving strong economic growth and lower unemployment. The different approach to inflation targeting in emerging markets reflects the unique conditions these countries face. Their economies tend to be more unstable, with frequent changes in trade conditions, unexpected economic shocks from abroad, and weaker financial systems. They also deal with different levels of nominal rigidities, such as wages and prices that don't adjust easily, and face special challenges in carrying out monetary policy. According to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, most central banks in emerging markets are interested in using inflation targeting, but they usually set higher inflation goals than those used in advanced economies. Brazil is a good example of how flexible inflation targeting can work well in a developing country. It managed to lower inflation from extremely high levels, the hyperinflation levels, to single digits while still supporting economic growth. Chile offers another example. It took a gradual approach, slowly reducing its inflation from 25% in 1990 to around 3% over 10 years. This shows that emerging economies can successfully move toward moderate inflation in a steady and well-planned way. Setting the right inflation target depends on the unique structural features of its economy. Research on inflation targeting in emerging markets shows that countries that rely heavily on exporting raw materials like oil or metals face different policy challenges compared to those that focus on manufacturing. These commodity exporting nations often deal with larger swings in their exchange rates, which means their central banks need more flexible policies, sometimes including slightly higher average inflation rates, to manage these ups and downs. The development of a country's financial system also affects what inflation rate is best. In countries with less advanced financial markets, a slightly higher inflation rate can help adjust prices more easily. That's because these markets don't work as efficiently in setting prices as the more developed systems found in advanced economies. This helps explain why many emerging market economies set inflation targets between 3 and 6% rather than the 2% commonly used in richer countries. Moderate inflation also helps countries manage government debt, which is especially important today as many economies have high debt levels. Studies show that inflation can lower the real value of government debt, that is, after adjusting for inflation. For example, raising the long-term inflation target from 2% to 3% could reduce the real value of federal debt by about 7% over 30 years. This gives governments more flexibility in how they manage public finances. History supports this idea. After World War II, the US government's debt to GDP ratio reached 108.6%. Over the next 10 years, moderate inflation helped bring it down by about 40% without major budget cuts or defaulting on debt. Similar patterns have occurred at other times when debt was high. Inflation acted as a kind of soft default, slowly reducing what the government owed in real terms without causing economic disruptions. This works because most government debt is issued in nominal terms, meaning that the payments are fixed and don't change with inflation. As inflation rises, the real value of both the principal and the interest payments goes down. This shift effectively transfers some wealth from lenders to borrowers. When the borrower is the government and the lenders include both local and foreign investors, it works like a hidden form of taxation, and one that doesn't require new laws or direct policy changes. Moderate inflation also strengthens central banks' ability to respond to economic downturns. One major issue is the zero lower bound, where interest rates can't be pushed much more below zero. When inflation is very low or negative, central banks have less room to lower interest rates to boost the economy during a recession. Research on how central banks can best operate under this constraint shows that a 2% inflation target gives them enough of a buffer to avoid hitting the zero lower bound in most cases. Economic models suggest that under ideal policy, the average interest rate would be about 4.4%, with nominal fluctuations of less than 1%. This means interest rates would only hit zero in very rare and extreme cases, about 4 standard deviations below the mean, and trust me, this is extreme. The European Central Bank supports this view. Its research shows that an inflation target around 2% is key for keeping monetary policy effective. It gives enough room to cut interest rates during slowdowns while avoiding the risks of both deflation and runaway inflation. Japan's decade-long experience with inflation targeting offers useful lessons about both the challenges and benefits of aiming for moderate inflation. After setting a 2% inflation target in 2013, Japan introduced large-scale monetary policies known as quantitative and qualitative easing. These measures helped improve the country's economic performance in several ways. Although it was difficult to reach the 2% target at first, Japan's continued use of supportive monetary policies eventually started to shift long-standing expectations of falling prices and slow wage growth. Japan's experience highlights several important points. First, reaching moderate inflation goals takes a strong and lasting commitment, along with the right set of policy tools. Second, the benefits of hitting these goals go beyond just price increases. They can also lead to more jobs, rising wages, and a more active economy overall. Third, moving from a deflation mindset when people expect prices to fall to an inflation mindset can take a long time, especially in countries where prices and wage setting habits have been in place for many years. Chile's example with inflation targeting shows how developing countries can design flexible systems that match their unique economic conditions. Chile used a step-by-step approach, slowly lowering its inflation target over time. It also used indexation mechanisms, which adjust wages and contracts for inflation and ensured strong coordination between monetary and government spending policies. This well-rounded strategy allowed Chile to cut inflation from almost 25% to about 3% while still achieving solid economic growth and strong job creation. Successfully putting moderate inflation targets into practice requires strong institutions and clear communication. Research on what emerging markets need before adopting inflation targeting shows several key requirements that must be in place ahead of time. These include an independent central bank, well-developed financial markets, and trustworthy government budget policies that support rather than work against the goals of the central bank. One of the main strengths of inflation targeting is its flexibility. Instead of strictly following a fixed number, successful inflation targeting focuses on keeping inflation expectations within a reasonable range, even if inflation temporarily moves away from the target due to unexpected events. This kind of flexibility is especially important for emerging economies, which often face more ups and downs and shocks from global markets. Close cooperation between a country's central bank and its government is also essential. Countries that have done well with inflation targeting often set up formal or informal ways to make sure government spending policies help and not hurt the goals of monetary policy. This coordination helps avoid conflict between different parts of economic policy and protects the credibility of the inflation target, leading to better overall outcomes for the economy. Managing inflation expectations is possibly the most important part of successfully applying inflation targeting. Research shows that when people and markets trust that inflation will stay near the central bank's target, policymakers can react more easily to economic shocks. In such cases, short-term changes in prices are less likely to lead to long-term shifts in inflation trends. This stability in expectations is especially helpful for emerging market economies, which have often faced high and unpredictable inflation in the past. Good communication plays a key role in managing these expectations. One major challenge is the common belief that any inflation is harmful and a sign of economic weakness. To address this, central banks and governments must help the public understand the benefits of moderate inflation, the dangers of falling prices, the deflation, and how inflation targeting supports wider economic goals. This kind of public education becomes even more important during times when hitting the inflation target requires keeping interest rates low, even if people are worrying about rising prices. The false belief that all inflation is bad has serious effect on how policies are designed and how the public views economic decisions. However, both theory and real-world evidence clearly show that moderate inflation adjusted to match a country-specific situation can bring many benefits. These include more flexible labor markets, better debt management, stronger monetary policy, and smoother economic adjustments. The best inflation rate varies from one economy to the other, depending on factors like the strength of institutions, the structure of the economy, and national goals. Advanced economies usually do well with targets around 2%, while emerging markets may need higher targets to deal with their own unique challenges and conditions. The main lesson from both research and practice is that there is no one-size-fits-all inflation rate. It must be designed to suit each country's particular needs and limits. Looking ahead, both policymakers and economists need to continue correcting the damaging myth that all inflation is harmful, while also staying alert to the real risks of inflation that is too high. The aim should be to achieve moderate inflation rates that, as shown by both theory and history, best support steady economic growth, job creation, and financial stability. Understanding this balanced view of inflation is essentially for building effective monetary policies in today's increasingly complex global economy. Well, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Also, leave a comment below and let's keep the debate rolling. Also, channel announcement tomorrow and the surprise on Monday are coming, so stay tuned. See you all. Bye bye.